Working title: The Driveway War. Jake had spent years saving up for his dream home, a charming two-story house with a perfectly paved driveway, nestled in a seemingly peaceful suburban neighborhood. The Homeowners Association, HOA, rules had been a minor concern when he signed the papers. Like many homeowners, he assumed they were just in place to maintain order. But peace was an illusion, one that shattered the day he received the letter. The neatly folded notice bore the HOA board's official seal, an ominous emblem of bureaucracy. Per HOA Regulation 14B, any unused driveways within the community are eligible for communal parking allocation. Effective immediately, your driveway has been designated as an overflow parking zone. Jake read it twice, his pulse spiking. My driveway. Community parking? The words rattled in his mind like a bad joke. The kicker came in the next paragraph. Failure to comply with this regulation may result in HOA fines and additional penalties. Jake clenched the letter in his fist, rage burning in his chest. Oh, hell no. He stormed inside, flipping open his laptop to scour the HOA bylaws. But the language was vague, the legal jargon just slippery enough to make the regulation technically enforceable. Frustration churned in his gut. There was only one person who could be behind this madness: Linda Holloway, the HOA president. Linda was the type of woman who wielded her clipboard like a scepter. Late 50s, a sharp bob cut, and a permanently condescending smile. She was a textbook HOA dictator. She thrived on control, and now she had set her sights on Jake's driveway. Jake marched into the HOA office, letter in hand. The moment he stepped inside, Linda looked up, her smile already in place. "Oh, Jake, I was expecting you," she said, saccharine sweetness dripping from her voice. "I assume you got the notice?" "What the hell is this?" he demanded, slamming the letter onto her desk. "Since when does the HOA get to steal my driveway?" Linda let out a practiced chuckle. "It's not stealing, Jake. It's community sharing. The board voted to better allocate space for residents who need it. So you're telling me that random strangers can just park in my driveway now? Without my permission?" Linda folded her hands neatly. "Technically, yes. Since you don't always use it, we figured it would be best to make it available for residents with additional vehicles. There's already a system in place. First come, first serve." Jake let out a humorless laugh. "This is insane. I didn't sign up for this." Linda tapped the HOA contract smugly. "Oh, but you did. The bylaws state that unused driveways may be allocated for communal purposes. The board's decision is final." Jake's blood boiled. "I own this property. The driveway is mine. You can't just decide it belongs to the community." Linda's smile widened. "Oh, but we can. The land is subject to HOA governance. If you have an issue, you can file a formal complaint at the next board meeting." He knew exactly what that meant. The board was stacked with Linda's loyal followers. Filing a complaint would be useless. Realizing he was getting nowhere, Jake left, slamming the door behind him. The next morning, Jake's worst fears were confirmed. There were cars in his driveway. 3 of them. A rusty Toyota, a silver minivan, and a sleek black Mercedes, all took up his space like they owned it. Jake's blood pressure skyrocketed. Marching over to the nearest car, he knocked on the window. A woman in sunglasses lowered it, looking mildly annoyed. "Yes. You're in my driveway," he said, barely containing his anger. "Move your car." She blinked. "I registered this spot through the HOA." "I don't care," he snapped. "This is my property." The woman shrugged. "Take it up with Linda." Oh, he would. Jake stormed back inside and called the police. There was no way this was legal. But when the officer arrived, he shook his head uncomfortably. "I hate to say this, but technically, the HOA does have authority over shared spaces." "It's not a shared space. It's my driveway." The cop sighed. "I agree, man. It's messed up. But unless the bylaw is overturned, there's nothing I can do." Jake stared in disbelief as the cop walked away. So that was it. He was just supposed to let complete strangers take over his property? That night, things got worse. More cars showed up. 5 this time. At 2 a.m., Jake caught some random guy peeing near his garage. That was it. Jake wasn't just mad anymore. He was furious. If the HOA wanted to play dirty, fine. He'd play dirty too. Jake wasn't a pushover. If the HOA wanted to take his driveway, they'd have to fight for it. The next morning, he parked his truck sideways across the driveway, blocking every available space. He had every right to park in his own driveway, and if freeloaders wanted to use it, they'd have to get through him first. It didn't take long for retaliation to start. By midday, a new notice was taped to his front door. You are in violation of HOA Parking Policy 14B. Blocking access to community spaces will result in fines. Please remove your vehicle immediately or face penalties. Jake read it and laughed. They were fining him for parking in his own driveway. An hour later, his phone rang. Linda's number flashed on the screen. Jake, she said in her most patronizing tone, we've received several complaints that you're intentionally obstructing a designated community parking space. Oh, you mean my driveway? Jake shot back. Linda sighed. We've worked very hard to create a fair and functional system for the community. Fair? You stole my driveway. Jake, you agreed to the HOA's policies when you moved in. If you continue to defy the rules, you'll be issued a fine of $50 per obstruction. He gritted his teeth. Let me get this straight. You're fining me for parking in my own driveway. Not at all, she replied smoothly. You're being fined for blocking community access. If you'd like, I can schedule you for a hearing with the HOA board. A hearing? Right. Like that would do anything. Jake hung up before she could say another word. By evening, 3 more tickets had been taped to his door. The HOA was bleeding him dry. But he wasn't done fighting yet. If they wanted a war, he'd give them one. And he was about to hit them where it hurt them most. Jake had never been one to back down from a fight, especially when it came to something as absurd as paying to park in his own damn driveway. The HOA thought they could drown him in fines and pressure him into submission. They had no idea who they were messing with. After pouring himself a strong cup of coffee, Jake pulled out his laptop and spent the next several hours digging through every legal document and HOA bylaw he could find. He was determined to find a loophole, something, anything, that would let him turn the tables on Linda and her power-hungry board. And then he found it. Buried deep in the legal jargon was a little-known clause. HOA Rule 22D. Homeowners may implement reasonable safety measures to protect personal property, so long as they do not interfere with pedestrian access. Jake grinned. Safety measures, huh? Oh, he had just the thing. The next morning, Jake got to work. He ordered a set of removable tire spikes, the kind used in private lots to deter unauthorized parking. Technically, they weren't permanent, which meant they weren't a violation of the HOA's policies. Next, he picked up bright yellow private property, no parking signs from the hardware store. The HOA's rules didn't prohibit homeowners from posting safety warnings, after all. By the afternoon, he had everything in place. The custom-built spike strip was discreet but effective, positioned just enough to remain unnoticed by unsuspecting drivers. And right next to it, in bold letters, stood his no parking sign. Now all he had to do was wait. It didn't take long. By the next morning, the first victim of his trap arrived in a sleek black BMW. The kind of guy who probably thought rules didn't apply to him. He pulled into the driveway like he owned the place, ignoring the bright yellow warning signs Jake had put up the night before. Jake sipped his coffee, watching from his window, heart pounding in anticipation. The car rolled forward. Then, bang! A loud metallic crunch echoed through the neighborhood, followed by a long, drawn-out hissing sound. The BMW came to a lurching stop. Jake grinned as the driver, a man in a designer polo and sunglasses, flung the door open, his face twisting in rage and confusion. He crouched beside his shredded tires, running his hands through his hair. What the hell? The man yelled. Jake stepped outside, stretching casually. Oh no, he said, voice dripping with faux concern. What happened? The man glared at him. My tires. There are spikes in your driveway. Jake feigned surprise. Spikes? Oh, you must mean my safety deterrent. You know, for trespassers. He gestured toward the warning signs. Didn't you see the signs? The man's face turned red. You can't do this. This is illegal. Jake shrugged. Actually, it's not. According to HOA Rule 22D, homeowners are allowed to install reasonable safety measures to protect their property. You parked on private property. That damage? That's on you, buddy. The man opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked around, probably hoping someone would back him up, but the neighborhood was silent. People were watching from their windows, but no one was stepping in to defend him. Jake smirked. Better call a tow truck. By the end of the day, 4 more cars had fallen victim to Jake's safety measures. Some drivers try to argue with him, demanding he pay for the damages. Jake simply pointed at the warning signs and the HOA bylaws. By day 2, word had spread. People were furious. But they also stopped parking in his driveway. Except for one person. Linda. Jake knew Linda wouldn't take this lying down. She had too much pride and too much of a need for control. Sure enough, the very next morning, he found a fresh notice taped to his front door. You are in direct violation of HOA safety codes. The unauthorized installation of hazardous objects in community spaces is strictly prohibited. Failure to comply will result in legal action. Jake chuckled. She was trying to turn the law against him. Classic Linda. But she had underestimated just how deep he had dug into the bylaws. That afternoon, as Jake lounged on his porch, watching the now empty driveway, he heard the sharp click of heels approaching. He didn't even have to look up. Jake. Linda's voice was sharp and exasperated. He finally looked up, finding her standing at the bottom of his porch steps, her clipboard clutched tightly in her hands, her face a mask of fury barely contained behind her professional facade. Morning, Linda, Jake greeted casually, taking a slow sip of his coffee. You need to remove those spikes immediately, she snapped. You're endangering community property. Jake raised an eyebrow. Community property? Last I checked, this is my driveway. And according to your HOA rules, I'm allowed to implement safety measures to protect my property. Linda's lips pressed into a thin line. This is harassment. You're deliberately creating a hazard. Jake leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Funny, I didn't hear you complaining when I was the one being harassed. When people were trashing my driveway, peeing near my garage, blocking my access to my own home. But the moment they face consequences, suddenly I'm the problem. Linda's face reddened. The board is holding an emergency meeting about this. I suggest you start preparing your defense because we will take action against you. Jake smirked. Looking forward to it. Linda huffed, spun on her heel, and stormed off. Jake watched her go, amusement flickering in his eyes. He had expected this. What Linda didn't realize was that he wasn't walking into that meeting empty-handed. He had been recording everything. The HOA clubhouse was packed by the time Jake arrived. Word had spread fast. Linda had called an emergency meeting, and half the neighborhood had shown up to watch the fireworks. Some were here out of curiosity, others to watch Jake get torn apart by the board, and a few to see if Linda would finally meet her match. Jake stepped inside, his expression calm, his phone in his pocket, prepped with all the evidence he needed. He spotted Linda at the front of the room, clipboard in hand, her usual smugness replaced by a tight-lipped determination. The board members sat beside her, some looking annoyed, others uncertain. Even they knew she had gone too far. Linda cleared her throat and stood, tapping her pen against the table for silence. We are gathered here today to discuss an urgent matter regarding a blatant violation of HOA safety regulations. Jake leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, waiting for her to make her move. She lifted a sheet of paper. Mr. Jake Reynolds has installed hazardous spikes in what has been designated as a community parking space, causing severe damage to multiple vehicles. His reckless actions are a danger to the residents of this neighborhood. Jake let out a quiet chuckle. You're seriously going with that? Linda ignored him. The board has reviewed the situation and will now vote on whether Mr. Reynolds should be forced to remove these dangerous obstructions and pay restitution for the damages caused. Before she could continue, Jake raised a hand. Hold on. Before you put this kangaroo court to a vote, shouldn't I get a chance to defend myself? Linda hesitated but nodded tightly. You have 3 minutes. Jake stood, pulling his phone from his pocket. I appreciate the generosity, he said dryly. First off, I'd like to remind everyone that my driveway is private property. The HOA has no legal right to designate it as communal parking without my consent. He tapped the screen, pulling up the HOA bylaws. And lucky for me, I have proof. He walked to the front, holding up his phone so the board members could see. According to your rules, the HOA cannot force homeowners to share their driveways unless a signed agreement exists, which, in my case, does not exist. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Linda's face twitched. That's not the issue here. Oh, but it is. Jake smiled. Because you sent me fines for obstructing a community space, when, by your own rules, my driveway isn't one. That's a fraud, Linda. Gasps echoed across the room. Linda opened her mouth, but Jake held up a finger. Wait, I'm not done. He tapped his phone again, and an audio recording started playing. Linda's voice crackled through the speakers. He's just some stubborn guy. We'll make his life miserable until he gives up. Silence fell over the room. Then, a few whispers. A couple of board members exchanged glances. Jake grinned. Linda, care to explain why you were plotting against a homeowner? Or should I send this recording to a lawyer? One of the board members, an older woman with silver hair, cleared her throat. Linda, is this recording real? Linda's face had gone pale. This is out of context. I motioned to dismiss all fines and remove Jake's driveway from communal designation. Another board member said quickly, his voice tense. I second it, someone else added. A few hands shot up. Linda's eyes widened. You can't be serious. Jake crossed his arms. Looks like the vote's not going your way, Linda. The headboard members sighed. All in favor of removing the fines and reversing the parking rule. One by one, hands rose. Even some of Linda's usual allies hesitated before siding against her. The verdict was clear. Jake had won. Linda stood frozen, her clipboard trembling in her grasp. She had ruled over the HOA with an iron fist for years, and now, in mere minutes, her empire had crumbled. Jake smirked. Tough break, Linda. A senior board member removed his glasses and sighed. I think it's time we discuss another motion, removing Linda as HOA president. Gasps filled the room again. Linda turned red. You can't just. We can, the man interrupted. You abused your power, attempted to manipulate the board, and cost residents thousands in unfair fines. I motion to vote on your removal. One by one, hands went up. Linda sputtered, glancing around in desperation. But there was no saving her. The board was done with her. The neighborhood was done with her. When the last hand was counted, the head of the board turned to Linda with finality. Effective immediately, Linda Holloway is removed as HOA president. The room erupted. Some people cheered. Others whispered. Linda stood there, shaking, before finally snatching her clipboard and storming out the door without another word. Jake let out a slow breath, watching her go. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, his driveway, his home, was finally his again. The morning after Linda's downfall felt strangely quiet. For the first time in weeks, Jake stepped onto his front porch and didn't see a single car parked in his driveway. No notices were taped to his door. No HOA goons lurking around. Just peace. Jake stretched, taking in the morning air with a deep breath. Damn, that feels good. The neighborhood was still buzzing from last night's spectacle. People had cheered when Linda stormed out, but now, in the light of day, many were wondering what would come next. Without Linda at the helm, the HOA was in disarray. Some of her loyalists had already resigned. Others were scrambling to distance themselves from her mess. Jake didn't care about any of that. All he cared about was that his home was his again. As he sipped his coffee, he spotted an older man walking up his driveway. It was Mr. Dawson, one of the senior board members who had voted against Linda. Morning, Jake, Dawson said, adjusting his glasses. Morning. Jake leaned against the porch railing. What brings you over? Dawson sighed. Just wanted to say, you did the neighborhood a favor last night. Jake raised an eyebrow. Did I? Dawson nodded. Linda had been a problem for years, but nobody had the guts to stand up to her. She kept everyone in line through intimidation and endless bureaucracy. Are you exposing her like that? It was long overdue. Jake chuckled. Well, I wasn't trying to be a hero. I just wanted my damn driveway back. Dawson smiled. Well, either way you got it. And the HOA? We're making some changes. First order of business, rolling back all of Linda's ridiculous policies. Jake smirked. About time. Dawson hesitated, then added, we're also looking for new leadership. Someone fair. Level-headed. Jake's smirk faded. Oh, hell no. Dawson laughed. Had a feeling you'd say that. He patted Jake's shoulder. Still, if you ever change your mind, let me know. Jake shook his head as Dawson walked away. The last thing he wanted was to deal with HOA nonsense voluntarily. Just when Jake thought it was over, the universe reminded him that people like Linda didn't go down quietly. That evening, as he relaxed on his porch, his phone buzzed with a message from a neighbor. Dude, check the HOA forum. Linda's back. Jake frowned and opened the community website. Sure enough, there was a post from Linda. To my dear neighbors, it began, in a tone that was anything but dear. It is with great disappointment that I must inform you of the reckless decision made by the HOA board to remove me from my position. This neighborhood is now vulnerable to chaos and disorganization. I urge those who believe in proper governance to stand with me as I challenge this unjust decision. Jake scoffed. Challenge. What was she going to do? Sue the HOA. Then he scrolled further. Effective immediately, I am consulting legal counsel to dispute my removal. Furthermore, I will be working to ensure the community remains protected from individuals who do not have its best interests at heart. Jake muttered, You've got to be kidding me. Linda wasn't just going to accept her loss. She was coming back for revenge. Jake wasn't about to let Linda worm her way back into power. He had worked too damn hard to be rid of her, and he wasn't going to let her claw her way back. So he got to work. First, he started gathering statements from neighbors. Plenty of them had been victims of Linda's petty rules and excessive fines. If she wanted to go legal, he'd make sure the HOA had an arsenal of evidence proving just how corrupt she had been. Second, he reached out to a lawyer of his own. Just in case Linda actually tried to sue, he wanted to be ready. Third, he made sure to keep a watchful eye on the neighborhood. If Linda thought she could start pulling strings behind the scenes, she had another thing coming. A few days later, the HOA held another meeting, this time to elect a new president. Linda, of course, wasn't invited. Jake showed up, mostly to make sure the board didn't screw things up again. As he took his seat, Dawson leaned over. You sure you don't want to run? Jake smirked. Absolutely. Dawson sighed. Figured. Well, let's just hope we don't end up with another Linda. Jake sat back as the meeting began, watching as the neighborhood tried to rebuild after years under Linda's rule. But in the back of his mind, he knew this wasn't over yet. Linda was still out there, and he had a feeling she wasn't done causing trouble. It took less than a week for Linda to make good on her threats. Jake woke up to another letter in his mailbox, but this time, it wasn't from the HOA. It was from a law firm. Dear Mr. Reynolds, our client, Linda Holloway, has retained our services regarding the improper and unlawful removal of her position as HOA president. We believe her termination violated due process and seek immediate reinstatement. Failure to comply may result in further legal action. Jake rolled his eyes so hard he nearly saw the back of his skull. Linda, you really don't know when to quit, do you? He took the letter inside, called his own lawyer, and read it out loud. So, what do you think? His lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Claire, snorted. I think it's garbage. The HOA board was well within its rights to remove her. If she wants to waste her money on a lawsuit, let her. Jake smirked. That's what I wanted to hear. Still, he knew better than to let his guard down. Linda was desperate, and desperate people were dangerous. A few nights later, Jake's suspicions were confirmed. It started with a small thing. His trash cans were knocked over, their contents strewn across his lawn. He shrugged it off. A coincidence, maybe. Then his mailbox mysteriously broke, its hinges ripped off as if someone had forced it open. But the final straw came when he walked out one morning to find a fresh coat of eggs splattered across his garage door. Jake clenched his fists. All right, Linda. Do you want to play dirty? Fine. Let's play. He checked his security cameras, and sure enough, there she was. Linda, under the cover of night, flinging eggs at his house like a rebellious teenager. The footage was almost comical, almost. Jake wasted no time. He printed out screenshots of the footage and sent them straight to the HOA board and his lawyer. He also posted them on the neighborhood forum with a caption that read, "Some people just can't handle losing." Within hours, the post blew up. The neighborhood, already tired of Linda's antics, was livid. Neighbors chimed in with their own stories, how Linda had once slashed someone's Christmas lights because they weren't HOA compliant, or how she'd called tow trucks on cars that weren't actually violating any rules. This wasn't just about Jake anymore. Linda had terrorized everyone. And now, she was finally reaping what she'd sown. The HOA board acted quickly. A restraining order was filed against Linda, banning her from harassing Jake or any other homeowner in the community. If she so much as set foot near his property again, she'd be facing real legal consequences. Then came the final humiliation. With her reputation in shambles and no allies left, Linda put her house up for sale. Jake grinned when he saw the "for sale" sign planted in her front yard. The queen had fallen. A few days later, as he relaxed on his porch, his neighbor Todd approached him, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. Hey, Jake. Jake glanced at him over his coffee cup. What's up? Todd cleared his throat. Listen, man, I know we didn't exactly get along when all that driveway nonsense was happening, but now that Linda's gone, I was wondering if I could. Jake held up a hand. If you finish that sentence with park in your driveway, I swear to God, Todd. Todd chuckled nervously. Right? Yeah. Never mind. Jake smirked. Good talk. With Linda gone and the HOA under new leadership, life finally returned to normal. Jake threw a barbecue in his front yard. HOA Liberation Party, as one of his neighbors jokingly called it. Everyone showed up, celebrating the end of Linda's reign. Someone even made a cake with R.I.P. Linda's HOA written in frosting. As the party died down, Dawson approached him with a smirk. You sure you don't want to join the HOA board? Jake laughed. Not a chance in hell. Dawson shook his head. Figured. Well, at least promise me this. If another Linda ever shows up, you'll be ready. Jake took a long sip of his beer, glancing at his private property. No parking sign, still standing tall at the edge of his driveway. Oh, he said with a smirk. You bet I will.